My name is Nina Rhode, also known as Ninja Pleasure in some kind of works. And I live in Berlin, where also I studied at the UDK. I studied sculpture, and during my studies I also started to work with a group called Honeysuckle Company. That was like 95 when we founded, yeah. And we still exist as friends, but we don't work as much as we did in earlier times. So we haven't done anything in the last 2 years, but before we constantly did works every year. And I stopped studying in 2002, I think. I did my master's diploma. And after that, I didn't go into the art world at all. I did the shows with Honeysuckle, and I worked together with Gonzalez, who is a musician. He lived in that time, he lived also in Berlin, now he lives in Paris. He's Canadian, and so I was traveling with him, doing some shows, doing his stage design and lighting. And then I think 2006 I decided to try a little bit about my own stuff to bring it out, and so I had a solo show in 2007, which was at my gallery, where I'm still on. As you can see in my show, that I have like not a constant thing or well, I have a theme, which is like, of course, like those wheels which are spinning, but I like to touch more or less any material, and I really like to mix it up. It's more like that some stuff inspires me, so I get an idea, or I have an idea and I look for the right material. In this show you see also stuff I found on the street in Berlin. Maybe this is connected with me because I moved to another area in Berlin where it's much more dirty, more garbage is flying around than where I lived before, and so maybe that inspired me also. As you can see, I like if stuff is moving, because I think everything is moving and it's not finished. There's always a metamorphose going on, or like even if you have a finished piece, it's still working by the surface, like what's around and the light and what comes together. Yeah. Work is transformation in general. Whatever you touch, you transform it into some things. But in my case, the transformation is, of course, one thing. The other thing is that it's still moving, or that you have the feeling of it is still moving, or it still could go into another level, so that you can have the feeling in my work also here and there that it's maybe not finished, that you still could take it and transform it again. I think this is also important because that's how I see the world also, I guess. And then there's one important piece in the show that you can see in several stadiums, which is like as an object spinning, where you can play with on strobe light and get your visual effects. Yeah, you get visual effects to play with. Like you play with it, and then you have like visual effects. And then the same piece of work you can see as a photograph in several stadiums, which is like those is basically the same, but spinning and photographed. And then the other big one is the same also, but in a different, not spinning as fast as those. Like Graham before, he said like, oh, your work looks like a group show, or like what you brought, it's like all together looks like a group show, and I agree. But they all have something to do with each other, but in a not... No, I shouldn't say that. I think I should say like they don't have actually to do so much with each other. Yeah. It's really like separate pieces. Yeah, it's like when I got invited, I had, of course, the opportunity to either make an installation where you show like one thing or like one idea, and you show several works about only one idea. This show now is more a wider field of my work.
My name is Cara Tolmie. I studied fine art at Dundee, just down the road. I'm from Glasgow, but I'm currently based in London. I use a lot of different media, so it's mainly performance and video, but often involves a lot of sound, a bit of writing, sometimes other things. So in this exhibition I've also got a text printout and a diagram, so a drawing diagram. It all stems from this one short loop of video, which is shot from a car. It's a short clip of a landscape, which is shown on a loop in this exhibition. And taking that as a starting point, I wrote a description of the action that unfolds inside this 42-second loop. And that's the text piece which is on the wall. So that description is very much a kind of straightforward, practical description of how the hierarchy between the three planes, so the background, the midground, which depicts a sort of mountain scene, and then the foreground, which is the ground which is in closest proximity to the person who's filming. So the description is really a study of the hierarchy between these three spaces as it unfolds in the frame, I guess. And then the diagram stems on from that description, and it annotates the action between the three different sections of landscape as a graph. And then I've also got a video installation built into a small sort of cinema booth in the room. In the video, it's kind of a dramatisation, I guess, of taken from the description. So I wrote a scene which transpires between three characters, Bob, June and Linda. And the action that happens between the three of them comes directly from this graph that I made. So the graph becomes a kind of score for dramatised action to unfold in the video. So that's the first half of the video. The second half of the video is three kind of separate portraits of what I would call is like a kind of character introspection. So basically I was sort of thinking a lot about this idea of in cinema there's often a scene in a film where there's a kind of depiction of like an inner state or an introspective state of a character, and how that's become quite it's kind of like an exotic idea or a desirable idea of wanting to, like, what is that thing of wanting to get inside a character's head as a viewer. So in this second section of the video there's these three studies of a kind of more introspective state of each of the characters. The exhibition is called Red Thou Art and Red Thou Shalt Remain, which it comes from a story about Martin Luther, who was the initiator of the Protestant Reformation. And the story goes, Martin Luther was a Catholic priest and a very kind of stoic and devout one, took it very seriously, and he made a pilgrimage to Rome. And at that time Rome was this really ostentatious, very flamboyant place, and there's a story about when the Italian monks were giving communion, with the bread being the body of Christ and the red wine being his blood. They would mutter under their breaths while they were giving the bread as the body of Christ, "Bread thou art, and bread thou shalt remain," as in, this is nothing but bread, it's not the body of Christ at all. Sort of muttering this really sacrilegious phrase, which, I mean, you never know what the reality of these stories are, but it's this idea of this anecdote about something that, and I think in some instances they kind of portray it as this catalyst that made him extremely angry and started this Reformation because of these events in Rome. So I was thinking about, I mean, a lot of the exhibition is really based on ideas of representation and translation. So my title takes this phrase, "Bread thou art and bread thou shalt remain," and replaces it with "Red thou art and red thou shalt remain." So, I mean, the original story, what I was drawn to with that phrase was these priests saying, "This is only what you say it is." So, and in terms of me changing the word bread to red, I was thinking a lot about what it means to read something and this act of interpretation, how something's represented in one form, and then once it's read, it eternally exists in another form, which is very ephemeral. You know, it's not so solid. To read something is to sort of imbue it with your own meaning and imbue it with often a cultural and historical meaning. Meaning it eternally exists in this other form, which is quite transient and open to interpretation and open to kind of morphing and so once something is read, it kind of remains that way in that form forever. So read you are and read you will remain. And a lot of the exhibition really hinges on this idea of, okay, so there's this original piece of footage and then it's read as a description, which is seemingly practical, but in another way, I don't think it's possible for a description to be ungendered. It's not possible for a description to be completely neutral. So I've got this first description, and then there's a second description, and then there's a third description, which is the video, really, which is a kind of dramatised description. And then the characters that are in this video, they're kind of neutral characters. You know, there's not really a strong characterisation. There's not really a character development. All there is this hierarchy of action between the three of them, which is dictated by this outer structure coming from this original piece of footage. So I guess the idea of like that they're sort of empty characters that that anyone could theoretically relate to.